Topic of our Dhamma talk this evening is Wisdom Part 2, and this much doesn't give you that much in terms of what we're really going to talk about. And the subtitle is going to be The Insight Knowledges and Their Benefits. And so Bennett and the emphasis will be especially on the benefits to be gained from the practice. And obviously it goes without saying that these benefits can be gained only by those who actually practice. And no work, no benefits. Now, well, it is like this. And so to reconnect to our Dhamma Talk Wisdom Part 1, back then we described a number of aspects connected with wisdom. We mentioned various synonyms for it, also the definition for it, and maybe just to repeat the definition of wisdom. Namely, it has the characteristic of penetrating objects according to their intrinsic nature or essential nature. And the function of wisdom is to illuminate the objective field, and its manifestation is as non-bewilderment or non-delusion, and wise attention or unification of the mind. In other words, concentration are its two proximate causes. Now, when we speak of wisdom, of course, we do not mean ordinary worldly wisdom. Let's say wisdom that is based on tradition, or wisdom of the farmers in predicting the weather and so on and so forth. But rather, by wisdom we mean intuitive wisdom that arises out of meditation practice. Now, what we are going to talk about is, in essence, nothing other than the path of purification. And this is the title that Acharya Buddhaghosa has chosen for his so important work, the Visuddhimagga. So each and every one of us here is on that path of purification. And so it is a gradual path of purifying oneself, and to be more specific, of purifying the mind of certain aspects that are not conducive to wisdom, and that are not conducive to happiness. Now, this path of purification has been described in the Visuddhimagga itself. It is also, or an outline can also be found in the path of discrimination to some extent, maybe not in the same way, but mentioning the same insight knowledges. And then in the Abhidhamma Sangaha, namely the manual of the Abhidhamma, which is a key work, a fundamental work for an understanding of the Abhidhamma, where the Abhidhamma Sangaha also mentions very nicely about the development that takes place in the meditation practice. Now, as further reference, certain points for the existence of a very definite certain path, we have the combined experiences of not just hundreds or thousands of meditators, but rather of 10,000s, of 100,000s, of millions of meditators in the course of human history. And so there have been meditators at the time of the Buddha who practiced and who then have been on this path of purification. And there are meditators after the time of the Buddha. There are meditators right now all over the world, and there will be meditators in the future who will be doing the same kind of practice and certainly will be having similar results. And so this certain path of purification is certain a path that certainly describes some very fundamental development that takes place when one is willing to practice mindfulness as described by the Buddha in the Satipatthana Sutta and many other discourses here and there. Now, with the tremendous advance of modern sciences, especially neurosciences, this path, as described in the Visuddhimagga, has been verified by researchers such as Dr. Daniel Brown and Dr. Jack Engler, and then lately especially by Professor Richard Davidson, who is one of the leading neuroscientists from Wisconsin University. Now, one might certainly still say, well, I don't believe all of this, and but the ultimate proof for the existence of such a path really lies in one's own meditation practice. So if one doesn't believe at the outset, never mind. Just if there's a willingness to just follow instructions, to be mindful from moment to moment, then quite naturally things will develop, and certain major changes will occur over time, and gradually a meditator will get the point that things are happening in a certain way. Now, the path of purification, as outlined by Elder Buddhaghosa or Acharya Buddhaghosa, consists of 7 major stages, and those are known as purifications. And those 7 purifications are the purification of virtue, sila, visuddhi. In other words, the first step towards purification is that one subjects oneself to an ethical code of virtue and lives according to this. So this certainly already brings about certain changes. Then we have purification of mind, which in the Pali scriptural language is known as citta visuddhi, and this purification takes place when concentration arises, and the concentration in turn will help to suppress the 5 hindrances. So with the 5 hindrances suppressed already, the mind will be somewhat purified. Obviously not totally, but to some degree. Now, The next purification is the purification of view, deity visuddhi in the Pali scriptural language, and we will go into this or talk about this in a couple of moments. This in the and then this is followed by the purification by overcoming doubt, kankar vitarana visuddhi in the Pali scriptural language. And certainly here what is meant is doubts about the entity that makes everything happen in the world, and certainly within oneself these may exist, and through careful observation of what is actually going on in the body and in the mind, a meditator then gets to see reality, and with this the doubts are overcome. And then we have the purification by knowledge and vision of what is path and not path, magga magga dasana visuddhi in the Pali scriptural language. And certainly this will be explained in to some extent later on. And then we have as number 6 the purification by knowledge and vision of the way, patipada jnana dasana visuddhi, which certainly covers the a big chunk or quite a number of insight knowledges, starting from the mature phase of the knowledge of the fast arising, passing away of formations, all the way up to conformity knowledge. And the last one is purification by knowledge and vision, jnana dasana visuddhi in the Pali scriptural language, which is the knowledge of the 4 supreme paths, supramundane paths. So just this much for general knowledge, so that you are somewhat familiar, or that at least you've heard about these purifications, and if some further interest is there, you might consider to read up in the Visuddhimagga after your retreat. Now, all of you have come to this retreat. At the outset of the retreat, we've started with the taking of the precepts, and then with an explanation of the basic meditation instructions, and part of those instructions included things such as restraint of the senses. So, and then when a meditator takes all the meditation instructions, restraint of the senses, doing all activities slowly to heart, and then sooner or later things start moving. And a meditator, after a while, then might realize intuitively that there are, in the end, only physical and mental formations occurring. So, in what we consider to be let's say Sue or Mac or whatever your name might be, and so there's a sense of a being there, a sense of a personality there. So upon a closer analysis, contemplative or meditative analysis of what is actually going on in this, or is actually going on, then we find there are just physical and mental formations taking place. So just mind and matter, and that's all. Now, this particular understanding then is already a benefit for a meditator, because it helps a meditator to at least temporarily be purified of the wrong view of a permanent self. And this then helps to shape or redirect the mind in a certain way. So what we find is there just physical phenomena such as the rising and falling movement of the abdomen, hardness, tension, stiffness, heat, cold, vibrations, various bodily movements, and then various mental states or mental objects such as thoughts and images and joy and happiness and restlessness and sloth and torpor and skeptical doubt and so on and so forth. And so when we're deeply observing or deeply absorbed in the observation of predominant objects, then we realize there is, at least at times, no sense of self. And so that makes then already a big difference. Now another major benefit that comes with this particular insight knowledge is the understanding of the interdependence. And interdependence in the sense that physical phenomena are dependent on mental phenomena, and mental phenomena in turn are dependent on physical phenomena. So if you were to possess only a body, then would you get very far? Not really. Or if you were to possess only a mind, that can think and that can have various volitions or intentions, etc., but you don't have a body, then would that certainly help you to manage life? Not really. Maybe. So the interdependence of physical and mental formations is another direct benefit that a meditator might gain from the practice within just a couple of days. And other benefits that are not necessarily reported in the Visuddhimagga, but that are now pretty obvious. And so I'm saying this based on interviewing yogis for quite a number of years now. And so some of those benefits are that meditators start to gain some clarity about what kind of mental states, or gaining some clarity that certain mental states are to the benefit of a meditator, and others are not really to his or her benefit. And then sooner or later a meditator might get the point that those mental states that are beneficial to oneself are the wholesome mental states, the so-called kusala cetasika in the Pali scriptural language. And the other ones are the unwholesome ones, akusala cetasika. Now, the distinction between wholesome and unwholesome mental states, do you think this is relevant or irrelevant? What, you're saying irrelevant? No? Relevant. Very relevant. So, if you want to spend your life mostly on the happy side, then you want to know more about wholesome mental states, because in the end, when there's purity of mind, this will conduce to your happiness, to your well-being, to also to the arising of wisdom, etc. Now, yet another practical benefit that is also not directly or specifically mentioned in the Visuddhimagga is that meditators start to discover intentions. So just the existence of intentions. So you might be, let's say, you might be standing at the buffet in line for ready for for lunch, waiting for your turn to come up, and you see all the delicious food there prepared by Surya Tenzo and Chris Tenzo, and then your eyes are bigger than your stomach, and then you can't wait until your turn comes up. And then you might, at such a point, notice how your mind is eager to reach for the ladle and then scoop some food and put it on your plate. And so with this, then gradually, with mindfulness practice, from moment to moment, gradually meditators discover the existence of intentions. And so then one notices over time that certain activities are preceded by intentions, mental intentions. And those could be bodily activities as well as verbal activities. And so the discovery of intentions might be extremely helpful to a meditator, because it will give him or her a freedom from impulsive behavior, which is based on not recognizing the intentions. So if one happens to be young and certainly very energetic, full of creative ideas, then one might want to do so many things and say so many things, whether wholesome or unwholesome is not really the point, and so easily one might then do something impulsively, and later on it turns out to be the wrong thing. So these are some of the benefits that a meditator may gain already within just a couple of days of meditation practice. When you're actually doing the practice, you might not even realize that those benefits have accrued for you. Now, obviously, you're not going to get stuck at this certain point. You will move ahead in your practice by continuously being mindful of whatever predominant object comes up. And with this, then sooner or later, you realize that those same physical and mental formations are somewhat connected. And they are connected by cause and effect. So let's say you see the delicious food, and then a desire arises to take plenty of a particular of your most favorite dish. Or you might discover that maybe, let me see, what's you might hear some cars, noisy cars, very loud cars, trucks driving by, and then you might get upset in the mind over the noise. Is this really necessary that they make such so much noise? And so then we have a connection between the hearing of the sound, or hearing the sound of the trucks driving by, and then the aversion towards those so-called noisy trucks. Now, when seeing a couple directly, intuitively, seeing a couple of connections, causal connections like this, in your sitting meditation, in your walking meditation, during your general activities, sooner or later you might discover that certain events happen in a haphazard manner. Yes, they do, or not? Do they? They don't. And do things, formations arise because of some supreme being, some higher power? Lon? They do not. So there is no higher or supreme being that is in control of our lives. And so with this, understanding that arises out of our mindfulness practice, again, something shifts in the mind, and we realize that those same physical and mental formations are connected just by cause and effect. So a physical formation may arise because of some other physical formation, or it might arise because of a certain mental formation. So in the end, there are just those four possible relations: a bodily object being the cause for another bodily object or result, and then a bodily formation being the cause for a mental result, and then a mental object being the condition for a different mental object being the result, and then a mental object being the condition for the arising of a physical object as a resultant. So with this, then the belief, the wrongful belief that formations arise by chance or through a hypothetical cause, this belief gets, or those two wrongful beliefs get suppressed, or at least weakened. Now, when a meditator goes on with his or her meditation practice, with patience, with persistence, with a lot of good will, and also with confidence with a growing confidence in the practice, then sooner or later this meditator may realize that not only the objects in the external world, such as the weather here in Taos is changing day by day. Yesterday morning it snowed, then the sun was out in early afternoon, we had a hailstorm, and then it was sunny again, etc. So not only do changes occur in the outer world, but changes also occur in the inner world, in the world of physical and mental formations that make up what we call a being. And when one carefully observes formations, when one carefully observes certain physical formations, mental formations, and certain formations as they are occurring at the different sense doors, then one realizes that all of those formations do undergo changes. So they're not resting the same for ever. And so they may change within a period of an hour, they might be changing within a period of, let's say, just 5 minutes, or even in shorter periods, such as a minute, or maybe even within just a few seconds or just a few moments. Now, when that particular understanding grows in a meditator, then it certainly leads to a major benefit. Namely, it helps a meditator to do what? To gain which benefit? So you're seeing the impermanence of formations. This helps you to wisdom. Well, you gain wisdom. Yeah. Pardon me?
Let go.
Let go of what?
Anatta.
When you're seeing anicca, you let go of anat. Let go of clinging to formations. Yes.
Clinging to self.
Clinging to self. Well, when you see formations as being impermanent, then what does this do to your notion of permanence? Does it do anything to this or not?
You let go.
You let go of this particular perception. So, the observation of the direct observation of the observation and certain understanding, knowledge of the impermanence of formations helps a meditator to abandon the wrongful perception of permanence and which so far we've been holding on to so strongly, assuming that the world is permanent, that we are going to be young and healthy and strong forever, and we're never going to fall sick, we're never going to die. And is this realistic? Obviously not. And so, seeing change in the outer world and certainly also seeing change within oneself on a level of physical and mental formations then very much helps a meditator to abandon that wrongful perception of permanence. And so, that wrongful perception of permanence in turn may then have an impact on the consciousness itself. So if our perception keeps being one of objects are permanent, then this will have an impact on consciousness. So the consciousness then will be influenced by this, and this in turn, this wrongful perception will then have a certain impact on consciousness, will then form and shape our views. So our views then will be one of permanence. Now, seeing the impermanence of formations, all of this gets rectified. So this is called abandoning wrongful perceptions. And certainly the perversions of perception, perversion of consciousness, chitta, the perversion of perception is your sanya vipallasa, perversion of consciousness is chitta vipallasa in Pali, and perversion of view is deti vipallasa in the Pali scriptural language. Now, directly seeing that certain formations keep changing all the time, then automatically leads on to an understanding that formations are ultimately what? Sukha or dukkha? Dukkha. Because, especially with pleasant experiences, we want to hold on to them. Or even with other formations, if we observe them really carefully, we want to see them for longer. We want to observe them for longer, and we can't because they keep changing all the time. So, and as outlined in an earlier Dhamma talk on dukkha, on physical dukkha, if change were not there, if formations were permanent, then we could take a shower just once and and that would be it. We wouldn't have to do it over and over again. You will remember that particular part. And so the fact that we take a shower in the morning and then the body is certainly clean, it doesn't mean that it's going to be clean forever. Sooner or later we're going to sweat, and certainly then we'll have to take yet another shower. So similar to what applies in the case of seeing impermanence also applies to the seeing of the unsatisfactoriness of formations. And so clearly seeing the unsatisfactoriness then brings you which benefit?
You abandon the perception of satisfaction.
There you go. It brings you the benefit of abandoning the perception of pleasure or satisfaction. So, and as human beings, we very much are under this particular perception, and we organize our lives in ways that we experience, or that we maximize pleasure, delight, satisfaction. We maximize pleasure, and by always arranging for the next pleasant experience. And if we experience a little bit of dukkha, then we'll try to get away from it as quickly as possible. And the human mind has developed many escape routes here. Now, as was also mentioned in an earlier Dhamma talk, dealing with dukkha, experiencing dukkha, unsatisfactoriness in one's life, has which two possible, or may lead to which two possibilities in a larger sense? So being exposed to great dukkha will lead you to yes, that's it, indeed. So, despairing over the suffering, and then not knowing how to handle it, and then ending up being bewildered. And bewilderment is a synonym for delusion. And so it's either that, either bewilderment, in the words of the Buddha, or it's search. So search from a religious point of view, searching for alternatives, searching for a way out of the suffering, out of the unsatisfactoriness. Now, searching for some alternative is then benefit or not?
Oh.
It's a huge benefit. And this is probably why most of you are here. At some point in your lives, maybe just a recent past, or long ago, many years ago, you may have hit a point in your practice where dukkha was quite intense, and this may have then triggered a search for alternatives. Now, when once a meditator has intuitively understood that formations are ultimately speaking not conducive to pleasure or happiness, but rather conducive to suffering, unsatisfactoriness, then with this comes a gradual acceptance and acceptance of the fact, and with this then one is more prepared to observe objects as they happen, to accept the dukkha as dukkha, and then this paves the way for an understanding of anatta, the absence of self. And so seeing this then helps you to abandon the perception of atta, of self. There you go. And so among the three things, namely permanence, the perception of permanence, perception of pleasure, and perception of self. It is the perception of self that is most difficult to let go of. And so, as human beings, tenaciously we hold on to this notion of a self. And if on occasion our sense of self gets threatened, let's say our personal views, wholly cherished views, get attacked or are being ridiculed, then we see this as an attack on our person. And so that notion of a self is deeply ingrained in the human mind. And so this careful, mindful observation of formations then helps us to understand, at least for a couple of moments here and there, that ultimately speaking, there is no self. There are just physical formations and mental formations occurring, and that's all. And there's there's none of me doing the practice or controlling, manipulating the practice. So this then, this understanding of non-self helps us to abandon the wrongful perception of a self, which is yet another big gain for meditators. It doesn't mean that that notion of a self is gone once and forever, but at least that notion gets weakened to some extent, and it will help you then later on to let go of it. It doesn't mean that you will never make use of the word I and my and mine anymore. But it means on an ultimate level, okay, the self doesn't exist. On a conventional level, conceptual level, you will still make use of personal pronouns such as I and possessive pronouns like mine, and so on. Yes?
So how do we integrate the fact that we do, even though we don't have a self, we have character tendencies and traits and habits and kind of personality traits? And those also come up and become more obvious in meditation.
Sure.
Even though you see that there's nothing permanent. I mean, how do you kind of resolve that?
Well, in the course of the meditation practice, our personality and traits and whatnot, they also get shaped to a certain extent. And so, let's say if in a person there's a strong sense of self, well, that then gradually gets weakened. And or one example, I'm not quite sure whether I've mentioned it in one of the Dhamma talks. In the meditation practice, very much helps us to see that ultimately speaking there is no self, and if earlier on we've been pretty egocentric in our personality, so it's me, I'm in the center of the world, so that kind of trait then gradually gets changed, gets shaped, reshaped. And so, as we notice how superfluous the notion of a self is, then we become more able to see others and to see their needs, and with that, our approach to others then changes drastically. And so, then we're moving away from an egocentric position to a more position where others are much more important. And that's a major change in one's trait or personality or however you want to call it. And it's a gradual change. No, it's not necessarily that this happens within just one single retreat, but if a meditator keeps doing daily practice and an occasional retreat here and there, then gradually it happens. And so it's a gradual, at first there will be a gradual change, and then or a small change, and then gradually it gets stronger and stronger. And that then explains why people like the Buddha was the Buddha and many of his disciples and others, of course, how they managed to then live their lives in service for others. And going out there, the Buddha sometimes traveling enormous distances in order to meet up with a person who he felt was ready for liberation. And now, this much is already not so bad, and then with further practice, then a period evolves during which meditators are likely to experience plenty of wholesome mental states, and those we've discussed already in an earlier Dhamma talk, and they're known as the imperfections of insight. Now, when those imperfections of insight arise, such as illumination and certain keen knowledge, and what else? Do you remember?
Faith in them.
Yes, for determined faith. Rapture, yes, and joy, yes. Rapture, joy is the same. Tranquility, yes. Equanimity comes later, yes. And happiness is also there, somewhere in between. And so joy, tranquility, happiness, faith, and then what about effort? Effort goes down or up? The energy goes up, and the mindfulness gets really sharp, really strong, and equanimity then arises, and the last one is nikanti, which is attachment and unwholesome. So, with the arising of those mental states, let's say so the first 9, do you think are there any benefits to these? The rising of those 9 benefits of 9 imperfections is beneficial or not? So you're saying yes, and why?
Because they help move you forward on the path, and also, like, the ability to interpret the Dhamma better obviously has benefits too.
Yes, and so they give a meditator a taste of what is possible through the development of the mind. So those imperfections show you forms of let's say happiness, joy, tranquility, and happiness that so far you will have not experienced. And the Buddha refers to especially those 3 as Dhamma delight. And so such an experience may make a huge difference in a meditator's life, because he or she might find, well, in order to have good feelings, good emotions coming up, I'm not necessarily limited to going to the movies or getting drunk or getting high or whatever it might be. There are within ourselves is a source for some rather encouraging, rewarding mental states. So Dhamma delight that is not dependent on the fulfillment of external or indulging in sense pleasures. And also what happens with the arising of these imperfections of insight is, so there's an arising of happiness, inner happiness, Dhamma happiness, and with this one realizes one doesn't need all those many material things that one so far thought were essential for a happy life. And so even if one's life is lived in a rather simple way, yet there's contentment in the heart, and that is quite enough. So that may make a huge change, or bring about a huge change in a person's life, which is another benefit that comes from the practice. And I remember on one occasion we had a meditator in Lumbini, a meditator here from the States. She was at the time a lawyer, and I forgot, business lawyer or something. And she said just because of her profession she needed a wardrobe which was as big. The wardrobe was going from one end of the room to the other, just full of clothing hanging there. Every day something different to wear. And her meditation practice changed all of that, and suddenly she, I suppose, suddenly gave away most of her clothing. Now, if you think of the monastics, we don't have much to choose. Every morning it's the same thing. Now, time is pressing as usual, so I'll try to shorten a little bit. Now, with a deepening of one's meditation practice, and having overcome those imperfections, no longer being a slave to them, no longer being attached to them, the mind then will become even sharper, and suddenly then one will see how formations, physical and mental formations, arise and pass away in a very quick succession, a quick manner. So no longer that an object has arisen, that it suddenly disappears. An object arises and suddenly the next moment it's suddenly gone. Now this particular phase in the practice usually goes along with much clarity of mind, many positive mental states, and these two will show you the potential of the mind, how fast the mind actually can be. So previously, as a non-meditator or beginning meditator, the mind was so sluggish and so slow in working on different objects and getting to know their true nature. And so all of this suddenly changes, and suddenly then you get an idea of what will be possible in the future. So if you keep meditating, your mind will become even sharper than it is at this certain point. And who prefers a dull mind over a sharp mind? Is there anyone here? I suppose not. Now, as pointed out already in one of the earlier Dhamma talks, a Dhamma talk on impermanence, and especially the destruction of formations. It was on the first way of sharpening the controlling faculties, and during that talk, it was mentioned that seeing the arising of formations helps you to dispel which wrongful view? nihilism or an annihilation view. So the view that everything ends. With the occurrence of death, everything ends, and there's just nothing there. And since the meditator keeps seeing objects arising, that certain wrongful view gets certain refuted on the spot. Now, this knowledge is not just about seeing the arising of formations. This knowledge is also about seeing the dissolution, the ending of formations. And the immediate benefit of this is, in terms of a wrongful view,
view of permanence.
What's that?
It dispels the view of permanence.
Yes, there you go. And so it dispels the view of permanence, or to express it differently, eternity. The eternity view. And so sometimes some people are of the opinion that formations last forever, and even if physical death occurs, then some entity will pass on. And so upon clearly seeing how formations end, then that eternity view gets dispelled. So once again, through our careful observation of formations occurring, then certain changes take place, and immediate benefits are there. Now, early on, Sharmila, you said that seeing or experiencing this will, if I heard correctly, induce a person to continue with the practice. Was that what you said? Yeah, and that is indeed the case. So based on experiencing the imperfections of insight, and also on based on seeing formations of rapidly arising and passing, one feels so encouraged in one's meditation practice. It's kind of like a high point, like reaching a peak on a long trek. And then you feel, wow, this is really far out. This is really the best I've experienced so far, and so it sure seems that it's worth continuing with the practice. And so with this, you feel very much encouraged to move on in the practice. However, what? However, sooner or later, as you continue, you are likely also to run into much what? Dukkha. There you go. Now, and I will shorten a little bit. So, maybe as part of the dukkha, with a further deepening of our meditation and deep understanding of, and very direct, very tangible understanding of the ending of formations, the disintegration, dissolution, destruction of formations. With this, a number of benefits come. And let us see what the Visuddhimagga has to say or in this regard. Namely, it mentions 8 advantages or benefits. The first one being the abandoning of the false view of becoming, or the eternity view. So that's also already also covered by the earlier insight knowledge. The second advantage is that of giving up attachment to life. So ordinarily we are tremendously attached to our own life. And this may become pretty clear if ever you are in a really dangerous situation. Let's say in a serious traffic accident, or maybe someone is just about to attack you. And then this direct seeing of the ending of formations then will help a meditator to apply himself or herself in a more constant manner to the practice. So one wants to practice more. So there's a constant exertion of effort in meditation. Also, the text says, as a result of this, there will be a purification of one's livelihood. One will give up base and low forms of livelihood. So if in the past one of your major interests was in, let's say, was gambling or playing these slot machines, then with some meditation practice you might realize this is not really so important in life. And so this is not really going to bring any deep or meaningful answer to questions such as death and so on. And then the fifth benefit, as attributed by, or as mentioned by the Visuddhimagga, is dispelling interest in big and small matters. So some issues, we tend to clutter our minds with things that we think are important, but then when we're in deep meditation, we realize, all this bickering and quarreling here and there with this person and that person, etc., isn't really all that important. And we could live our life, or we could do quite well to let go of it. And so at this point, we're ready to let go. Also, what certainly comes with this particular phase of the meditation practice is because we see formations as dissolving and including this sense of self weakening more and more, and so with this some degree of absence of fear will be there. And then there is a gaining, the text say, an acquisition of patience and gentleness. So the practice brings you patience and certain gentleness. And just to give you one example, many years ago we had a meditator, I think from South America, and he just showed up at the center, and it turned out he was a sailor. So working on ships, and the ships traveling all over the globe. Now, being a sailor, I suppose, or the life of a sailor is not necessarily a very gentle life. And certainly, so this man, when he came, he was pretty straightforward in his language and down to earth, and a little bit on the rough side, but you could tell with a good certain heart. And so in the course of the meditation practice, and he was at the center actually not that long, but by the end of his retreat, his certain ways, his manners had already smoothened and softened to some extent. So when you see that, when you see the difference between a meditator, when he or she comes to the center in terms of facial expression, in terms of physical and certain verbal behavior, and then you see a person just before his or her departure, and there's much more refinement there, then you really understand this is working. The practice is really bringing about certain deep changes. And so what the texts say in reality is actually happening. And then the eighth benefit, as mentioned in the Visuddhimagga, is a meditator takes delight in a secluded forest, monastery, or meditation center, and then wants to do meditation practice, be it samatha practice or vipassana practice, and then there's also conquest of sensual delight. So just to mention this list of 8 benefits, because this list is given in the Visuddhimagga. Now, early on, Catherine mentioned dukkha. Yes, so the dukkha comes again, and the dukkha may be experienced in the form of seeing physical and mental formations as will contribute, or as being a great source of misery. And at that point, you will not be that delighted, or you will not be walking around with a big smile on your face. And the reason for it, this is that you've seen formations, you've seen basically the negative sides, you've seen the flaws of the physical and mental formations to some extent, and with this, you're kind of like disappointed. So, earlier on, the assumption was that formations are permanent, that they're conducive to pleasure, happiness, that there's a sense of self, and this gets reinforced. And now you see very directly there's no permanence, there's no pleasure there, and there's no permanent self. So it comes like a big, it's kind of like a big flop. And so with this, then you think, my goodness, what am I, what am I here for? And what this particular phase in the practice does is it abandons adherence to formations due to attachment. So we have a tendency to attach ourselves to formations, and not even knowing this. And so seeing the flaws of formations again and again and again, then gradually meditators will kind of step back and be a bit less attached to formations. And when asking this question in interviews, when meditators are experiencing this particular point, then indeed they say, when the question is, do you feel more, a stronger adherence to formations due to attachment, or a lesser adherence? And usually the answer is less adherence. And that very well matches with what happens later on. Now, I'll keep it really short. With a further exploration of physical and mental formations, one then develops a certain disenchantment with formations. And what this means is that meditators are no longer taking delight in formations. So if earlier on, at the very outset of our meditation practice, here comes a new object, and then the mind jumps to this new object happily, come on, let me see what is this object doing, and so wanting to find out, getting all excited about it. Now at this point, this is not the case anymore. And so there is a certain disgust with formations. There's a certain, one feels so repulsed by them. Now, as usual, there's a benefit to this. And the benefit is very simple, namely an abandoning of delight. And this delight being known in Pali as nandi. Now, there's more to this particular aspect. Since, as human beings, we have this tremendous tendency to attach ourselves to formations and to take delight in formations, therefore we're suffering again and again, and therefore it certainly is so difficult to find true peace or liberation. And the major benefit at this point is the greater the repulsion, the greater the disenchantment with regard to formations, the easier it will be to abandon formations. So it is as if, it's kind of like this example of a rocket being launched into space. The rocket, when it takes off, has to overcome what? Gravity. Gravitational forces. And in order to reach outer space, for human beings to reach the outer space of Nibbana, we need to overcome what? Attachment to formations. And that attachment to formations, especially at this point, breaks down quite a bit, or gets weakened quite a bit. So it's not necessarily a pleasant experience, but in terms of gaining liberation, or moving in that direction, it's very important. Now, with further practice, gradually meditators want to or start looking for alternatives. So if these physical and mental formations that we've been observing already for such a long time, and if they are flawed, essentially, fundamentally flawed, then there's something really wrong with them. So if something is wrong with them, then one doesn't want to hold on to them anymore, and one will start to look for something else. One will start to look for maybe some escape route, some gate of liberation. And so this is what then happens next in one's practice, and that in itself is a major benefit. The mind starts to some extent looking in a different direction, although at this point it doesn't yet quite know where to look and in which direction to go. Now, further practice will then bring an even closer understanding of the three universal characteristics of anicca, dukkha, and anatta, and eventually meditators will experience the knowledge of equanimity about satna formations. And some days ago we talked about this, and the major benefit of this knowledge of equanimity is the purpose of attaining the path of stream entry, and also the fruition of stream entry. Now, there are many other benefits that come along with this, such as the arising of plenty of wholesome mental states, and equanimity, for instance, the gradual strengthening and strengthening of equanimity could be seen as a major benefit. So if a meditator so far in his or her life hasn't experienced that much equanimity as yet, then when one comes or when one directly experiences this knowledge of equanimity, then one gains access to some new ways of keeping the mind and also new ways of living. And it makes a huge difference whether you go through life with an extremely reactive mind and aversive every now and then, and then all at other times longing for this, wanting, liking this or that. So with the arising of this particular knowledge, these things change, and the mind becomes very stable, very strong, very balanced. Now, this brings us to the end of our talk. The ultimate benefit of practice, obviously, is the realization of the peace of Nibbana, the peace of Nibbana through the path of stream entry, and may this happen during the remaining days of this retreat. And this is it for now.
Just one question.
Yes, Jim.
What would an evening of Dhamma talk be without a question from Jim? I know.
Yes.
I apologize.
No, that's all right.
Stream entry is abandonment. I see you describing it based on conviction. Conviction toward the world. The conviction that arises through the development of the maturation of my meditative practice toward formations in the world.
Yes.
And so it's not moving toward, it's moving away. I'm letting go of.
Well, Ayakema once has said, this whole practice is not about gaining something, but rather about letting go. And that nicely summarizes what the practice is about.
There's no money back guarantee, is there?
Well, what's that?
Karma.
Oh, karma. So sooner, there's no guarantee there. You just keep doing your practice, and then sooner or later that letting go takes place.
It's an act of great courage, is what I'm trying to say.
Pardon me?
It's an act of great courage.
Yeah, sure.
Great faith.
Sure, that is very much the case. And if you think of it. If you think of a person who decides for the first time to meditate and doesn't really know what this is all about and where it is going to lead the person, then actually it is, like you're saying, an act of great courage for a person to choose this path. I don't know, not realizing fully what is right ahead. But in the end, there is a happy end.
The movie ends well, is what you're saying.
Yes, it does.
watch the whole movie.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Okay. So, no, that's all right. You're most welcome. So maybe this much for tonight. It's already 8:24, and